Hello and welcome everybody to this very significant and important online thing about the persecution and criminalisation of the six Palestinian human rights organisations, of which we're very, very honoured to have two representatives with us tonight, Wessam Ahmad from Al-Haq and Ubi Aboudi from the Bisan Centre. I am the branch rep for Derry as part of Ireland Palestine Solidarity Campaign. This has been organised by as part of Bloody Sunday 50 week of events, and it's been organised by the Pat Finucane Centre and the Bloody Sunday Trust. So I'm not going to speak for very long because I think that it's important that we hear from SM and Ubi as much as possible. And at the end, there will be a chat box for any questions that people or any comments that people would like to make. So thank you. And I'd like to introduce Wessam.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much to the Pat Finucane Centre and the Bloody Sunday Trust for organizing this event and hosting us. This time of commemorating 50 years of Bloody Sunday, where 26 unarmed civilians lost their lives in a confrontation with a legacy of colonialism, and the issue continues to perpetuate throughout the present. And for us to be given this platform in this setting means a great deal. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to your audience on the issues that we are facing in the face of contemporary colonial struggle. And Al-Haq is the first Palestinian human rights organization. It's been challenging Israeli occupation for decades and plays an important role in civil society. And the parallels really about Bloody Sunday and what we are seeing today within the Palestinian context go very broad, but the specific issue of the events leading up to Bloody Sunday and the protests against the internment without trial have a lot of parallels to the administrative detention that Palestinians face today on a regular basis. And we see today the development of the use of various means and methods to continue to try to stifle dissent and attack those that are trying to resist against colonial oppression. The things that have changed are very much about the means and methods through which these issues are happening, and we see the advancement of technology as a new tool in that oppression, and the issue of cyber surveillance is one of those mechanisms that we are seeing being manifested as a new means and methods of colonialism and stifling dissent. And regardless of how those new means and methods have evolved, the people will continue to struggle for their freedom, and we see that shared struggle throughout the world. And we see the struggle that the Palestinians face as just a microcosm of global injustice. And in order for us to be able to move forward in a more just world, we have to address the injustice throughout. And I also found it very interesting that the issue of truth recovery plays such an important role in the Pat Finucane Center, and Al-Haq actually also means the truth. And it's that pursuit of truth, that pursuit of justice, that we continue to move forward despite the challenges. And it's clear that that pursuit of truth is also a common struggle throughout. And again, it's an honor to be able to be here today and present the current situation that that we are facing. And I look forward to addressing any questions that the audience might have. And happy to turn it over to my colleague Obey.
Thank you, Wissam. Thank you for hosting us. This is for me personally and for the organizations a very emotional event. For us, we have always been inspired by the Irish struggle for freedom and their history of resisting colonialism and resisting, I would say, also subjugation. Colonialism, as we all understand, is not a past thing. It's not something that lives long beyond in the history. It's something that we still live with today, and people deal with its ramifications on everyday basis globally, especially in the global south, of course, but also in countries that have been subjected to colonial history, such as Ireland. For us, as Palestinians, we are always inspired by the stories of resistance, the stories of struggles, whether it was the hunger strike of Bobby Sands and his comrades, the Irish attempts of getting truth, justice, and freedom, like the Bloody Sunday Trust that's hosting us today. I work for Bisan Center for Research and Development, which is a Palestinian civil society organization. It was established back in 1989 as a think tank of thinking, of emancipating, maybe thinking of ways for emancipation and from all forms of subjugation and discrimination, whether they were class-based or they were ethnically based, like from the occupation and from all forms of subjugation, whether also gender-based, which we are very proud of. Bisan has worked over the years to try to understand even what people did globally to try to, I would say, build up the local strength of the communities, because here we are talking about communities that are resisting ethnic cleansing and trying to build their strength in facing unimaginable powers, colonial powers, and military brute force, and actually on several levels also a misinformation campaign that has been conducted and sponsored by I would say mass media. For us at Bisan, it has been always an inspiration to looking on Ireland and its experiences and the way that people have come together and trying also to build their community strength in face of everything that Ireland has faced throughout its history.
Okay. Wissam and Ubay, could I just ask you to maybe elaborate a bit on about the circumstances, the background as to which the designations were made against your organizations and the other 4 organizations that have been criminalized by Israel?
Sure. I mean, the recent designations are part of a long process of trying to undermine the ability of civil society to operate, and started with smear campaigns, reaching to the level of death threats, and even the allegations that are being used today have been used for years, but they've always been dismissed because they've been proven to be unsubstantiated, and the most recent move, we see it as the drastic step that was taken after the rest of the international community refused to buy into the narrative and take action on their own. So Israel took its power to be able to create law that supports its narrative to fulfill that goal that it was trying to achieve of stifling and removing basically the obstacle in its eyes of Palestinian civil society standing in the way of its broader colonial strategy.
Okay. And what are the implications that are already happening, or implications that you can see for the work of human rights defenders, yourselves and the likes of Defence of Children International and the Women's Committee and the Agricultural Committee?
Well, if, the effects have been quite immediate. This is, of course, part of a smear campaign and part of using force and intimidation. The Israeli occupation has tried all over the years to stifle Palestinian civil society organizations, which is, if you look at it at its core, it's basically self-organizing of the Palestinian community that started on volunteer basis and still enjoys a wide range of volunteers volunteering General Assembly and Board of Directors of the organizations and on several other levels, even whether it was research or advocacy, etc. So this attempt, they have taken, I think, their biggest step. The only step that they have left is just coming into our offices, arresting us or shooting us in place. Using and abusing, I would say, anti-terror legislations, which is the Israeli part is also, the Israeli law is quite wide. It's first an annexation attempt trying to enforce Israeli law on occupied territories, which is quite dangerous. On the second level, of course, it has affected a lot of our partners that are working and registered in Jerusalem, international partners with the Israeli authorities, because now the laws they might be legally accountable and might be persecuted for supporting the organizations or working with them. Anti-terror legislation has also put tremendous pressure on the organizations, because now we used to live in a state of uncertainty. It's not like that before the laws. We were safe. They broke into our offices at Bisan and DCI even before the designations back in July. But these designations also makes it illegal for us to work in these organizations, and we can be arrested and tried up to 25 years for being involved and working with these organizations. So it has also effect on our families. I can say, for example, my wife has not been able to sleep for the first couple of days of the designation. She was imagining that the Israeli army would break the door and barge into our house at any moment. This reality is something we live with as Palestinians, but now we live with it as also being human rights defenders. It has also put implications and complications on the works of Al-Damir and DCI, who have lawyers that go in front of military courts trying to defend political prisoners or children that are persecuted by the Israeli military. And these kinds of legal ramifications, we even cannot imagine how deep they will go if they decide to implement it fully, this designation. But for us also, we have an understanding, and from our partners and from the solid working relationships we've built over the years, the past 30 plus years in the case of Bisan, or 40 plus years as an case of Haq is that we do not work with donors, we work with partners, with people that believe in human rights agenda and are willing to stand up against this kind of persecution and do everything possible to make it null and void.
What you're saying about really, really resonates. You know, especially as the Pat Finucane Centre who's hosting this. You know, Pat Finucane himself was a human rights lawyer who was murdered for standing up for human rights, for justice, and also Rosemary Nelson. And, you know, so it really does connect on, you know, your struggle at the moment really connects on that fear, you know, the threat to life, everything, you know. So it definitely has a you know, very strong connection.
Well, of course, people that are facing repression will have similar experiences globally. Myself have read the autobiography, for example, of Malcolm X and found it very inspirational in how Black people were persecuted systematically in the United States. And I found real connections when I read about Bobby Sands and his hunger strike, and made the connections with Palestinian political prisoners on hunger strike, like some administrative prisoners now going on it in rejection, in I would say in protest against inhumane and inhumane persecution. So these kinds of connections, we feel it. We feel it that people that are subjected to these policies, often the personal and human story is lost, is not even told about how significant is this on us, on the families, on the work we are doing, on the people we are working with. And I think this kinds of connections also makes it possible for us to push against this kind of repression and this kind of persecution.
I do think, though, and I would like both of you or one of you to speak about this, you know, the responsibilities of states, of third party states and international organizations, they actually protect human rights defenders. And I mean, yous have a lot of connections with the UN and with the EU and other, you know, other huge international bodies, and also from the point of view of the Irish government, who, to my shame and to the shame of most Irish people, have not really stood up and spoke out forcefully about the criminalisation of your organisations.
Well, I mean, we're very, we always maybe expect the Irish support, and I think the position that the Irish government has taken is much better than others, and the spectrum of where the solidarity stands in different governments. I would say that the Irish government is on the leading end of the spectrum, and we would like it to play a stronger role in pushing other EU member states and the EU as a whole to push back against these designations. And I think today, in this day and age where we have the development of the international human rights regime and the role of human rights defenders being much more in the forefront of the discussion, there are a lot more tools available to us than there were at the time when Pat Finucane was a pioneer in human rights defense, using the law as a tool to challenge the oppressive regime and challenging it through the system that exists. And we very much see a lot of the legacy of Pat Finucane in the work that we do in using the law to pursue our rights. And the irony is that these tools that have been created by the international human rights mechanism and international law are the tools that have been designated for us to use as the legitimate tools to pursue our right to self-determination and pursue justice. But it is actually our ability to refine and develop the means and methods through which we challenge this oppressive regime using these tools and still have an impact that have very much played an important role in the reaction we have gotten in how we use the law and pushing the law, not simply about reiterating what is written on paper, but also pursuing the law's enforcement and pursuing accountability. And these are the things that have made Israel uncomfortable, and the designations are a way to remove the source of that discomfort. But the states definitely have an important role to play in recognizing, as Ubay said, the abuse of counterterrorism legislation and the use of the term terrorism to try to scare away support, and the recognition of this situation as one of a conflict situation between a colonizer and colonized. Throughout history, the colonizer has used these type of tools to challenge and prevent the pursuit of the right to self-determination and the struggle against colonialism. And we see it simply an evolution through history being manifested in the Palestinian present.
I think that's really what's cut through with people, you know, from the genesis of the BDS movement and through yourselves, and that colonial narrative has really, I think it really has reached people globally, and you know, it's made it a global struggle because it connects with so many other struggles like Black Lives Matter and, you know, Extinction Rebellion. You could name but a few. So, you know, and that I think that is where Israel is. I wouldn't say back against the wall, but I think that is where they are finding it difficult to actually break down the solidarity.
Well, it's correct that the connections of the people, the general outcry of activists, human rights organizations, and even some governments globally has surprised the Israelis. I think that if Gantz, the Israeli war criminal, Minister of War, and who hopefully through the work of Al-Haq and other organizations like it will see him stand justice in The Hague, in the ICC in the coming years. We wouldn't is regretting that he did this designation, and he wouldn't have done it if he understood that there will be so much global solidarity. For us as being oppressed, the way forward is through global solidarity and global partnerships. Us working together, the people that are losing everything because of the current situation, whether it was class exploitation in metropole countries or colonial and class mixed exploitation in the periphery. For us, these kinds of connections will help us to make a dent in the system. If it weren't for the solidarity and for people pushing, for example, against their governments and putting pressure on their politicians, we wouldn't have seen such solidarity with the 6 organizations or with the Palestinian people on a global scale. And this is what we rely on. This is what we count on for change in the future. Through mass mobilization and through coordinated action globally.
Okay, thank you, Ubay. Kira, would you like to open up the chat for anybody who would like to comment, ask a few questions?
Yep, certainly. So people can either put the chat to everyone, or if they prefer, they can just send it to me, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'll be reading out people's. Well, the first comment we have is Joseph pointed out that Jewish Israeli artist Zohar's Palestinian paintings exhibition at the Gashard Centre in Derry is now on display. So for all the Derry ones, that'll be an interesting event. Another question here from Kieran. How have the designations impacted on the day-to-day lives of your staff and partners? Do they face extra harassment now at the airport or at the Jordan border?
Well, I mean, I can answer and following what Obey mentioned previously, but the practical impact on us has been limited in the sense that these issues of harassment at the border crossings or direct movement towards us now hasn't happened. What we are seeing is the implementation of an indirect approach to try to prevent this from continuing by putting the issue on the radar of the international community and trying to play on behavioral psychology and simply have the external support network out of fear move away from the support that they've been giving us. And so far, luckily, that hasn't worked. And on the contrary, we have gotten increased support, and the level of support has really provided us with additional energy to keep going. And the work has increased, no doubt, because we also want to make sure we continue to do the core work that Israel has sought to undermine and distract us from. But that additional energy has allowed us to not only deal with the designation issue, but also continue our daily work on important things such as the ICC.
Okay.
Ubay, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think that there's a reality that people have to understand, that most of our staff have Palestinian green identities, which is, there's a three-tier system for us Palestinians. It's quite a part of the apartheid system. People living in the West Bank and Gaza have a green identity, in Jerusalem a blue identity, and in areas occupied by Israel in 48, it's Israeli identity. So we have different rights, but generally people that have green identity are not allowed to travel through the airport, are not actually international travel is quite difficult for us, especially after COVID. We have only one main crossing, which is the border crossing with Jordan that we go to, which takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And there has been increased complications on that. But yes, the Israeli authorities have interviewed and harassed some of the staff of the organizations, have sent threatening messages, and we hope that through increased pressure from international solidarity, we'll be able to push back against it.
Great, thank you. We have another question that's coming from Inez. She is saying, do you have any plan to challenge the designations, which I suppose you have already sort of answered, but if so, what are they? And I'll just add that in with question below from Paul. What advice would you give us here tonight to help raise awareness of the designation? Because I think you've talked a bit about the sort of international pressure and international awareness. So what advice would you give us here tonight?
Well, with regard to the challenging, I mean, obviously this direct system through which we would be able to challenge using the legal system, that system is part and parcel of the oppressive regime that we are facing. It's the Israeli judicial system, whether it's the military court system or through other means. But even recognizing these dynamics, we have poked the system to provide that secret evidence that it is using to justify its moves in order for us to assess how would we be able to defend ourselves. And the response has been that this evidence will remain secret and you will not be privy to it. And that, in our opinion, especially when the international community is also responding that it hasn't seen any evidence, leads us to, have a stronger conviction that on the baselessness of these allegations, but using the tool of secret evidence allows them to continue to hide that baselessness. And putting us in a situation that if we want to try to defend ourselves, we would be trying to defend ourselves basically blindfolded and with our hands tied behind our back. So it's a system designed to work against us from the start. So we have no hope in the Israeli judicial system functioning in a way that addresses the injustice, and that's why our efforts have been put more on the international community putting pressure on Israel, and to address the issue of what advice we would give. It is, in my opinion, to continue to exert that pressure through the different channels that you have, whether it's through your governments, through your organizations, providing a platform and continuing to keep the issue on the radar, because Israel is also taking into account human nature that over time people will lose interest in the issue, and then they will be able to continue to implement their policy without pushback. And so the issue needs to be kept on the radar by efforts such as the ones that you're taking today.
Okay.
Thank you, Wissam. Ubay, do you have anything to add?
Yes, of course. Look, adding to what Wissam said and building upon it, I think one of the most important things is to build more awareness and more action from solidarity groups globally. We really encourage everyone to write their members of parliament, their Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or the equivalent, to put pressure on them and ask them a clear question. Ask your Minister of Foreign Affairs, what action have you taken in order for Israel, to force Israel to rescind this designation to support Palestinian human rights organizations? We encourage you also to send for your members of parliament to have this, what do you call it, questionnaires for questioning for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Parliament on their actions to support Palestinian civil society. What have they done to rescind this designation, and how they are planning to continue support for the organizations. This is on one part. On the second part, we also encourage people to join the local Palestinian Action Group or the local Solidarity Group that they have, and be part of a collective effort to support Palestine and support justice and freedom in the world. And maybe another thing, we also encourage people just to understand more about the Palestinian situation, about the Palestinian context, and how this intertwined system of colonialism and apartheid are playing hand in hand in the subjugation of the Palestinian people.
Thank you. So that leads on to our next question from Paul. Is the increased military repression in Palestine actually a sign of weakness by Israel? And that sort of ties in with the question below from Jack. Do you think that the designation was a response to B'Tselem labeling Israel apartheid last year? Do you think that Israel is scared of the word apartheid? And do you think we will see an attempt to crack down on its use? So kind of a two-part, is that repression a sign of weakness by Israel? Do you think that Israel is scared of the label apartheid, and will we see an attempt to crack down on the use of that word?
Even, I think, the fear that Israel has with regard to its image is always been a factor in how it reacts to various Palestinian initiatives, and from the BDS movement to the use of the term apartheid. These have constantly made Israel uncomfortable, and we see the moves against us as part of their attempt to remove us from the equation, and it is also I see it as a move that is very arrogant after enjoying impunity for decades, that there's a certain sense that it can do whatever it wishes, and get away with it, and what it says will be simply taken for granted as the truth, and not questioned. But the steps with regard to the designation and the response has sent a strong message that there is an appreciation for Israel trying to go too far, and that these things will not go unquestioned. But it is part and parcel of an apartheid regime to go after the individuals and organizations that work against apartheid. And then, in fact, it's one of the elements within the Convention Against Apartheid.
Well, just to give things where they are, the term apartheid was coined, I think, scientifically in regards to the Palestinian context, by the work of Al-Haq. And this is something Al-Haq started using the term apartheid even long before any of the international or Israeli organizations started using it. And now it has become, I think, a mainstream description of Israeli system of repression and colonialism on Palestinians and control. Of course, this kind of work that's being done by Al-Haq and other Palestinian human rights organizations and civil society organizations, they are working on two levels. The first one is increasing the resilience of the Palestinian community, such as the work done by OAC, UPWC, BISAN, and the other is documenting and challenging the legal system of control and apartheid, which is being done by Al-Haq, Al-Damir, and DCI Palestine. I think this kind of Palestinian civil society that relates at its core the Palestinian narrative globally, tries to organize the Palestinian community in order to increase our self-resilience, our resistance to this kind of grave human rights violations, to this kind of ethnic cleansing. And I use the word ethnic cleansing, and I mean it in every sentence. is part of the Israeli attempts to just, I think, re-engineer the Palestinian society through stating which kinds of self-organizing Palestinians are allowed or not allowed to have, which kind of organizations we are allowed or not allowed to have. And this has been actually talked about as part of Israeli foreign policy. They have started organizations long ago, such as NGO Monitor, UN Watch, and others that have been closely affiliated with the Israeli government and in some terms funded also by them, and closely cooperating with former Israeli officials and current ones on the attacks against Palestinian civil society. But when these attacks all failed, and this was actually in the first press statement by the war criminal Gantz, when we failed to persuade the world about the nature and role of these human rights organizations, they took action, immediate action in their hands, because they feel the pressure not just on their system of occupation, but also on themselves as people complicit in war crimes. For us, in order to understand the Israeli agenda and Israeli policy, we do not see it as a reaction, we see it as an action in a system of actions that are designed to subjugate the Palestinian people, and in the global context, as an attempt to silence the witnesses that are reporting on Israeli war crimes being committed against the Palestinian people. So, yes, Israel was worried. Israel is worried about the work of civil society organizations. And Israel, I think, took the last bullet it had of using anti-terror laws to try to silence these organizations.
Thank you. We have another question from Fadil. I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So he wants to know, what are your feelings and thoughts around the accelerated process of normalization of some Arab countries, and what are your expectations then from non-Arab countries?
Well, obviously, any incentive that is given to Israel, despite its policies, sends the wrong message that these policies are being rewarded, and Israel's reaction will be natural, that if it is doing these actions and it is still being rewarded, then it is going to be able to continue to operate with impunity. And that's why our work is addressing all states, regardless of the Arab nature or not, because it is the values that those states hold, and the need to uphold human rights principles that require action on the part of the international community, and regardless of what the character of the states might be, some states are aligning with Israel and rewarding it, and some are pressuring against that, and we need to see more pressure against and less rewarding, because otherwise the message for Israel is the cost-benefit analysis is working in its favor, and it's going to continue.
Well, when you're talking about normalization, what we are talking about is also not just the rewarding of Israeli ethnic cleansing policies. We are talking of a move against what's happening in the international scene. The European Union, for example, has started to label Israeli settlement products and started even talking about there's a need for action, and this has become part of the discourse against Israel, although it has not been translated into policy, but this has been part of the discourse, starting to be part of the discourse. We are seeing in the United States a rise in the support for Palestinian rights, especially among social democrats and Dreamer movements and other progressives. And this kind of, I think, shift within the traditional Western powers that are facing more and more backlash from their peoples for their country's policies, official policies on Palestine. I think Israel has run away to the only places that are ready to accept it in open arms, which is other despotic regimes. These regimes also share with Israel I say, grave and horrendous history of human rights violations. And this is something in common between those two. Some of them even are war criminals, such as Israel, and are officially committing war crimes every day, for example, in Yemen and in other places. Others have done horrendous crackdowns on human rights defenders and civil society organizations in their countries, such as the case of Jamal Khashoggi. So when you're seeing one apartheid war criminal going to join the other war criminals, you would say, okay, this is a natural recourse, and this is something also shows what's wrong in the world today. I think that the people in general are against these kind of policies. So we are seeing on official level, there is this connection with the Israeli government and Israeli officials, but on the popular level, from the popular masses, people are standing up against these kinds of practices. And what we are relying on is that people will reclaim the public sphere and policies of their countries.
Thank you. Just before I let Catherine wrap up, are there any more questions from our audience? You can put it in the chat box. Any more questions? In the meantime, for the benefit of our guests tonight joining us from Palestine, I would like to show you our window in the Museum of Free Derry. So I'll just screen share it. As you can see, that this is our window today. So Free Palestine is very much alive and well in Free Derry.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you both for taking part in this event. I don't think we have any more questions, so I'll let Catherine wrap up.
Again, Ciara, I'll just repeat, thank you very much, Wes and Manubai, and it was wonderful hearing from you tonight, and it really has been, it's been inspiring, and it's inspired me in a way that I'll just to keep keep it public, the publicity going, and also it's important through social media to try and keep amplifying the message and what's happening there. Just by the way of, on Friday night at 6 p.m, there will be a demonstration, a protest. It's a global day of action against the demolitions in Al-Nakab and Sheikh Jarrah, and also in the West Bank and Beta and all our villages near Hebron. So we're holding a demonstration at 6 p.m. at Free Derry Corner, and everybody's welcome to come along. Just to stand in solidarity with the people who are being displaced and ethnically cleansed from their homeland.
Thank you, Catherine. And I've actually got a few messages coming in here. Free Palestine, it's so inspiring to hear you both. Solidarity from Southeast Kent, so welcome, Kent. Lots of lovely comments flooding in, so shukran, everyone. All right.
Shukran ilkum. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
both.
you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.